Okay, so we're going to talk about chord scales a bit, and as I mentioned in the previous video, chord scales are a bit like modes, but they're different, and here's why. With chord scales, what we're worried about, what we're focused on, is how each of these tones relate to the chord of the moment. We're always going to be in C major, but how do the notes of D minor 7 and all the notes in between, how do they relate to the sonority of D minor 7, and are they useful, or should we avoid them? So that's what we're going to study first. Okay, you'll see that there are a bunch of blackened note heads here with little S numbers, and there are a bunch of numbers like 1, 3, 5, 7 for the chord tones, and then there's some tension numbers like 9 and 13. There might be a sharp 11 down here and an 11. So where do we get these numbers? And it all has to do with how each tone functions in comparison to the chord of the moment. So for, in this case, A minor 7. Okay, so all these chords function in A minor 7 in the key of C major in a certain way, and that's why they give them a certain number. All right, so let's, I'm going to wipe out all this stuff and go get a fresh copy here of this file so that we can practice a bit. All right, so these are all the, what we just saw, but without all the numbers and without the blackened note heads and everything. So when we play a C major 7, there are a lot of notes that sound good with it. Like D sounds really good with it, and A sounds good as well, but F maybe doesn't sound that great with it, and it's what we're going to call an avoid note. So how do we know whether a note is going to sound good with the chord or not? And we'll see that it depends on its distance above a chord tone. All right, so I'm going to start with C major here, and I'm just going to type in the chord tones, because as we know, every major 7 chord is going to have 1, 3, 5, 7 as a formula. So we're going to put those in. Actually, I could go here and I could do the minor 7 as well, right? Because every minor 7 is going to have 1, flat 3, and then it's going to have a 5th and a flat 7. So the formula will we want to start with the chord itself, right? Here's another minor 7. So this would be 1, flat 3, and this would be 5, whoops. And this would be flat 7, and 1. Okay. So, but the question is, what are these notes in between? And it has to do with the distance above each of these chord tones. You see these chord tones with the numbers? So D is above C by how much? By a whole step, and that means generally it will sound good with the chord. So I'm going to put in a 9 there. Call that a tension. So it's an octave and a step above the root here. So a major 9th, we're going to call it a 9. And hopefully you're familiar with this from harmony 2. All right. Likewise, G to A is a whole step, and so we're going to put a tension number 13 in here. Now this is a major 6th above the root. Major 6, add 7 to that, you get 13. So that's a tension as well, right? But this one in the middle is, the reason when I played that one it didn't sound great is because there's a conflict here between the third of the chord and this chord this note that's a half step above it, right? So this is going to be called an avoid note, and we're going to call it S4. Again, many of you know this from harmony 2 already. So that's going to be our formula for our Ionian chord scale, right? C Ionian chord scale is going to have the S4 in it. And then one thing that you're going to have to do in harmony 3 to show that you know that's an avoid note is to go down here and, you're going to fill in the note head with a blackened note head to show that that's an avoid note. Okay, let's go to the Phrygian chord scale. We'll skip Dorian for a second. So with the Phrygian, I'm going to measure all these intervals, right? Are they whole steps or are they half steps? So in this case, E to F is a half step, so that's going to be an avoid note. So we're going to go S flat 2. If we called it 2, then that would be like an F sharp, right? Because that would be a whole step. So this is S flat 2. It's a flat 2. It's a minor second, right? G to A is a whole step, so that'll be a tension. And what tension is it? E up to A is a fourth, so it's going to be tension 11. So it'll get a tension number. Remember, the tension numbers are the high numbers, and the scale numbers are the low numbers. And then 5 B to C is a half step, so that's going to get an avoid note number again, S flat 6. Okay, good. And so now I have to put in my avoid notes here. Not going far enough. I thought I was getting good at this, but I'm not. Here we go. Okay. One more. Okay, so now I've put in my filled in note heads. So that's for the Phrygian mode. All right, and so, you know, we could keep doing these all day, but I just want to skip to a completed version in 1 second here. Let's just do Locrian, shall we? Because it's a little bit different. The formula for a minor 7 flat 5 is 1 flat 3 flat 5. That's a chord tone, right? And then flat 7 and 1. So Locrian, we might think, oh, it's super dark and there are all these low notes, but actually it only has one avoid note, and that's going to be the S flat 2 because it's a half step. But then this flat 3 to this one is a whole step, so that's an 11. Flat 5 to, you know, F to G is a whole step, so this is a flat 13 that's actually a tension because it's a whole step above a chord tone here. All right, and we need to make sure we put in our avoid note head here, so the blackened one. All right, so once we look at the completed example, we'll see that these are the formulas for the various chords in any key. These are the chord scales. F Lydian is always going to have sharp 11. In fact, it has all 3 tensions and no avoid notes, right? And Dorian is a special case that we'll talk about in class a few times, but just to say that even though it's a whole step above 5, it's going to have S6. And that has to do with the fact that Dorian is subdominant, right? And we dominant is 5/7, so that's G7. And what's an important note in G7? It's the third, that B. So we don't want to use this B on. We don't want to use it in a focused way on this 2 minor 7 because it's going to be part of our 5 chord. So here's our 2. So C, and then B, and then B. We don't want to go B, and then B, and then, it kind of takes the punch away from the dominant if we steal this note and put it on the subdominant chord here. All right, and so, that's the idea we're going to practice in class, but remember, a whole step above a chord tone is almost always a tension, and a half step above a chord tone, for now, is an avoid note. And finally, just to say that, of course, we can put chord scales back into a parallel context, and we can see how they relate to each other, all on a C root. So that's another handout I have for you. We'll talk about hybrids in Harmony 4. But this one has all the C parallel chord scales, and hopefully you'll be able to find a handout on this in your on the OL as well. Okay, so the parallel modes of C. All right, so chord scales, that is, chord scales of C. So that's a little introduction to chord scales. for diatonic chords, all the diatonic chords of the scale.